Our word of the week this week is salvation. We're looking at both the noun and the verb. Let's take a look. So the noun is soteria, salvation, and the verb is sozo, I save. Sometimes we'll see sozo used in regard to healing, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Both the noun and the verb come from an adjective, saos, and saos means safe. So the most interesting thing about the word of the week this week is this etymology, that it comes from the word safe. And it's a very old word, and safe came to mean to make safe or to bring safely out of a difficult situation. So the thing to remember about our word of the week is that it always presumes jeopardy. In classical Greek, salvation was the acute act of either gods or men to forcefully snatch someone out of serious peril. So in short, in English, we're talking about rescue. We're not talking about lending some minor aid to someone. We're talking about an acute act, an abrupt intervention in someone's life that changes the course of their future. They're in serious peril, they're in serious jeopardy, and this intervention changes that. I remember probably 15, 18 years ago, as a pastor, I had someone ask me a question. She said, I hear all this talk in church about salvation and about being saved, but about being saved from what? She said, what would I need to be saved from? And it was a fascinating question because she was an upper middle class person who lived in an idyllic community, who had a successful family, children who were high achievers, a beautiful home in coastal Maine. In some regards, it would be difficult for things to get much better for her. So the idea that she needed to be saved from jeopardy, from peril, was difficult to compute. That was hard for her to understand. And so it's important for us when we look at this word to recognize that component of it. We're talking about a dire circumstance from which someone must be rescued. So let's start out and look at our first example with physical salvation from a real crisis. We're going to see Paul and company in a ship, and they've been driven by a storm for quite some time. Things are bad. They've had to lash ropes around the hull to keep the hull together. They've thrown cargo overboard, and we're even told at the end of the story, or near the end of the story, that they threw the ship's tack, the ropes and pulleys and sails and whatnot, overboard with their own hands. So imagine feeling that the circumstances are so dire that professional sailors with their own hands throw the means of controlling the ship overboard to lighten the load and hope that they'll just drift to a shore somewhere. So this is Acts chapter 27, verse 20. All of our readings today are from the ESV with the Koine supplied. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. And our being saved here is to sozesthai, and it's an infinitive with an article. And so this is their hope of being saved. It's the perfect example of their recognition that they need an acute act to snatch them out of this peril. They did all that they could do, and there was nothing more that they could do now but to hope for some intervention to save them. Next, we're going to see this term hurled as an insult at Jesus on the cross, and this is in Mark chapter 15, verses 28 through 30. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. So save yourself here is sosan. This is an aorist imperative, second person singular. Save yourself, come down from the cross, rescue yourself from this most dire of circumstances. You boasted about having all kinds of power, that the temple would be torn down and rebuilt. He, of course, was speaking of his body in 3 days. But now they tell him, let's see what you've got. You're nailed to a cross by the Romans. Save yourself from that situation. Now we're going to shift into the theological significance for humanity. And we'll start with references to God saving his people. This is from John the Baptist's father at the time of his birth, Zacharias, speaking in prophecy. And this is Luke chapter 1, verses 69 through 71. Notice it's broken up into stanzas because it was poetry. And he has raised up a horn of salvation, soterias, for us in the house of his servant David. And as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. So salvation, soterias, and then to be saved, soterian, and we see that salvation is an important component in the theology of Judaism prior to the arrival of Christ, predicting the arrival of Christ. And here, Christ's front runner, John the Baptist, his dad is reciting this at the time of his birth. Now let's see, Jesus used the term in his conversation with the woman from Samaria, and he reiterates that salvation is an element of Jewish theology leading up to his arrival. This is John chapter 4, verse 22. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Jews. Hey, soteria. I want you to notice that hey, soteria is articular. It has the definite article in front of it. He's not talking about salvation as a concept. He's talking about the salvation. He's talking about a definite and specific thing that was a component of Jewish theology for which the people had been waiting, and with his arrival was now here. When Paul talks about salvation, he heavily references it as something that's going to happen in the future, or at least it will have its culmination at the eschaton, at the end, at the last thing. So he talks about salvation as a process and as a thing that people experience in life, but its fulfillment, its totality is realized at the second coming, at the parousia and the gathering of the saved out of the world and into the new kingdom. We'll get a look at this in Romans chapter 10, verses 9 and 10. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Sosesthai, pardon me. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved, soterian. And if we put it all together with all of Paul's writings, we see that there's process with a culmination. And no one says that better than Peter when we look at 1 Peter chapter 1, and this is verses 3 through 5. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation, soterion, ready to be revealed in the last time. So you see, he builds the whole thing out, the reasons for your security and faith and hope, and how You've put your trust in this one, and the whole thing is being saved for you, being held on to for you to be fully revealed at the last time. It's an eschatological hope that you're waiting for, but you possess it now. The fulfillment of it is at the end. Pretty great stuff. So we have our noun, soteria, soterias, soterion, depending on case, gender, and number. And we have our verb, sozo, both of which come from saos, which means safe. And so what do we know most importantly about this notion of salvation? It's an acute act to rescue someone from jeopardy. That's what it is. No more acute act than the notion of God becoming one of us, living a perfect sinless life, dying on the cross in our place to provide us newness of life, rising from the dead to seal that new life. And then the big acute act, the parousia, the second coming, breaking into the world and bringing this plan of salvation to its ultimate fulfillment and culmination at the last day. Great stuff. Salvation, word of the week. I hope it was good for you. If it was, please like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, Karis Kai Reine Humin, grace and peace to you.